It was at night. I was asleep with my children. I heard an explosion but didn't make much of it. When I woke up the next morning, I discovered some of my children were died. Those who were still alive would cough at some powdery substance. I was also affected.
On the night of August 21st, 1986, something invisible moved through the highlands of northwestern Cameroon. There was no explosion, no warning sound, no visible threat. Villages simply went quiet. By morning, silence had replaced life across an entire region. People, animals, insects, all unmoving. Fires burned themselves out. Food sat untouched. Doors were left open as if everyone had simply stepped away at the same moment. But no one had. Whatever passed through Lake Nyos that night did not look like a disaster. It felt more like the world had been paused. A lake with no reputation. Before that night, Lake Nyos was unremarkable. It sat inside an ancient volcanic crater, surrounded by hills and farmland. Locals used the land nearby for grazing animals and growing crops. Children played near the water. Life followed familiar rhythms. The lake did not bubble. It did not steam. It did not smell unusual. There were no legends warning people away. Nothing about Lake Nyos suggested danger. And that is what made what happened next so deeply unsettling. The first morning, when the sun rose on August 22nd, survivors from nearby high ground noticed something wrong. No smoke from cooking fires, no movement along paths, no voices carrying through the valleys. Entire households were still. People lay where they had fallen, indoors, outdoors, in beds, on roads, near doorways. Animals were scattered in fields and near water sources. Birds lay beneath trees as if they had simply dropped from the sky. There were no visible injuries, no signs of struggle, no damage to buildings. It looked like life had been gently turned off. Confusion before fear. Initial reactions were confusion, not panic. Some thought it was an illness. Others feared poisoning. A few believed it was something supernatural. But nothing explained how entire villages, spread across kilometers, had been affected at the same time. And nothing explained why some people survived, while those just a few meters lower did not. Elevation mattered. That detail would become crucial later. The survivors' accounts. Those who survived described strange sensations from the night before. A sudden dizziness, a heavy feeling in the chest, a deep fatigue that arrived instantly. Some remembered waking briefly, unable to move, before losing consciousness again. Others remembered nothing at all. There was no pain described, no dramatic symptoms, just a rapid loss of awareness. And then, nothing. The landscape itself had changed. Investigators arriving days later noticed odd details. Vegetation close to the ground appeared damaged in some areas, but untouched in others. Insects were absent. Small animals lay where they had fallen, while birds that nested higher were sometimes unaffected. Most disturbing of all, the lake looked different. Its deep blue color had shifted to a murky red-brown. No one understood why. Early theories fall apart. At first, officials suspected a volcanic eruption, but there was no ash, no lava, no seismic activity. Poisoning was considered, but no containers, no residue, no obvious source. Even contagious disease failed to explain the pattern. Illness does not strike silently, instantly, and selectively based on altitude. The facts refused to align with familiar disasters. This was something else. The geography of death. Mapping the affected areas revealed a chilling pattern. The lowest points, valleys and basins, suffered the highest losses. Higher ground saw more survivors. Those who slept on elevated beds sometimes lived, while others on the floor did not. The invisible force had moved like a liquid. It flowed downhill, It pulled. It respected gravity. A silent killer with no shape. Whatever caused the disaster did not burn, collapse, or destroy. It suffocated, without warning, without sound, without leaving visible evidence. This absence of spectacle made it harder to understand and far more terrifying, because if something could do this once, quietly, it could do it again. The delayed realization. As days passed, another unsettling truth emerged. The danger had not fully passed. People entering the area reported dizziness and nausea. Rescue teams had to work carefully, sometimes retreating without understanding why. The air itself was suspect, but air leaves no fingerprints. A rare phenomenon comes into focus. Eventually, scientists began considering a possibility almost unheard of outside academic journals. Not an explosion, not poison, but a natural release of gas. A gas that is colorless, odorless, heavier than air, capable of displacing oxygen. A gas that humans exhale every moment of their lives. Carbon dioxide. The lake is a trapped lake. Nyos was not just a lake. It was a deep volcanic crater connected to magma chambers far below the surface. Over time, carbon dioxide from the Earth's interior had been seeping upward, slowly dissolving into the lake's deep waters. Cold, pressurized water trapped the gas, year after year, layer by layer, like shaking a bottle of soda without opening it, until something finally triggered the release. The night everything escaped, scientists believe that on August 21st, something disrupted the lake's balance. Possibly a landslide, a temperature shift, a minor seismic disturbance. The exact trigger is still debated, but the result is clear. The gas erupted from the depths, not violently, but massively. A towering cloud of carbon dioxide burst from the lake, rolling outward and downward, hugging the terrain as it moved. People did not choke, they did not cough, they simply lost oxygen, and then consciousness. Why no one had a chance? Carbon dioxide does not warn you. There is no smell, no burning sensation, no immediate panic. Breathing feels normal until it doesn't. By the time the body realizes something is wrong, it is already too late to react. This is why doors were open, why people were found mid-movement, why animals lay exactly where they had stood. There was no time to run. A disaster without a soundtrack. No alarms sounded, no screams echoed, no chaos erupted. The night passed quietly, which makes the Lake Nyos disaster one of the most disturbing natural events ever recorded. Not because of what people saw, but because of what they never heard. The question that remained, once the mechanism was understood, a new fear emerged. If this could happen at Lake Nyos, how many other lakes were silently storing the same threat, and how close were people living to them? Why this story still matters. Lake Nyos was not a failure of nature alone. It was a failure of awareness. No one had been watching the lake closely. No one suspected danger. No systems existed to warn anyone. The threat was invisible, quiet, and patient, and it waited. What came after the silence? Understanding. What happened at Lake Nyos did not bring comfort. It brought fear. Because once scientists identified the cause, a far more unsettling realization followed. The disaster was not finished. The lake had released gas, but not all of it. And worse, Lake Nyos was not alone. The immediate aftermath. In the days following the event, the region became a place of uncertainty. Entire villages were evacuated. Survivors were relocated to temporary shelters, often without clear explanations. Many did not know if it was safe to return, or if they ever would. Officials struggled to communicate what had happened. How do you explain an invisible threat that leaves no marks? How do you reassure people when the danger cannot be seen, smelled, or heard? For the survivors, the land they had trusted their entire lives suddenly felt hostile. The problem with returning home. As weeks passed, pressure mounted to allow people back. Homes were still standing, crops still grew, livestock could be replaced, but the lake remained, and the air near it remained questionable. Scientists monitored gas levels constantly, knowing that even a small release could be dangerous. Every measurement carried weight. One miscalculation could mean history repeating itself. A second, even more disturbing discovery. While studying Lake Nyos, researchers expanded their focus. They looked at nearby bodies of water. What they found was alarming. Another lake, Lake Nyos, just 100 kilometers away, had experienced a similar but smaller event 2 years earlier. At the time, it had not been fully understood. Now, with Nyos as context, the pattern became undeniable. Multiple lakes sat atop volcanic systems. Multiple lakes were capable of storing massive amounts of dissolved gas. Nyos was not an anomaly. It was a warning. The fear of a chain reaction, scientists faced an urgent question. What if Lake Nyos released gas again? And what if other lakes followed? The region's geography made the threat worse. Valleys funneled air downward. Villages were often built in low-lying areas. If gas escaped, it would travel the same deadly paths as before. The danger wasn't theoretical, it was ongoing. Why the lake couldn't simply be drained? One might assume the solution was simple: remove the water. But draining Lake Nyos was not an option. The lake was held back by a natural rock dam, ancient, unstable, and eroding. Lowering the water too quickly could cause the dam to fail, unleashing catastrophic flooding downstream. A second disaster was already built into the landscape. Every solution carried risk. Living under an unseen threat. For displaced residents, daily life became suspended in uncertainty. Some refused to return, even when told it was safe. Others returned reluctantly, sleeping lightly, listening for signs that could never come. Children were warned not to go near the water, but not fully told why. Fear without understanding tends to linger, and linger it did. The psychological impact survivors described a lasting unease. Not panic, something quieter. A persistent awareness that the environment itself could turn against them without warning. Night became especially difficult. The disaster had happened in darkness. Silence had preceded it. Many associated stillness with danger. The lake no longer felt like part of nature. It felt like a presence. The challenge facing scientists. Globally, very few experts had ever studied this type of event. Limnic eruptions, mass releases of gas from lakes, were barely documented. There were no established playbooks, no proven safety models. Scientists were learning in real time, under pressure, with lives at stake. Mistakes were not an option. The race to find a solution. The goal became clear. The gas had to be removed, slowly and safely. Not released all at once, not disturbed violently, but gradually. The challenge was how to accomplish this without triggering the very event they were trying to prevent. The lake had to be disarmed without shaking it. An unprecedented idea. Eventually, a solution emerged. One never before attempted at this scale. Degassing. The concept was simple in theory and terrifying in practice. Insert a pipe into the deepest part of the lake. Allow gas-rich water to rise naturally. Let pressure differences do the work. If done correctly, the gas would escape in a controlled manner, harmlessly dispersing into the atmosphere over time. If done incorrectly, the result could mirror the original disaster. The first attempt, when the first degassing system was installed, tension was high. Scientists monitored every variable. Emergency plans were prepared. Local residents were warned and kept at a distance. As the system activated, a fountain of water rose into the air, white, foaming, unsettling. But it did not spread. The gas dissipated safely. For the first time since 1986, there was cautious optimism. Why one pipe wasn't enough measurements soon revealed a sobering fact. One pipe could not remove gas fast enough. The lake was too deep, the volume too large, the accumulation too great. More systems would be required, and funding, coordination, and long-term monitoring would be essential. This was no longer a temporary operation. It was a permanent responsibility. The cost of inaction. Without intervention, Lake Nyos would continue accumulating gas. Years or decades later, another release would be inevitable. Nature was patient, but it did not forget. A community living with the answer. The people of the region eventually returned, not because fear disappeared, but because life demanded it. They rebuilt homes, they planted fields, they adjusted, but Lake Nyos was never again ignored. Warning systems were installed. Monitoring became continuous. Education spread, slowly. The disaster had rewritten the relationship between people and their environment. Lake Nyos was not a single night of tragedy. It was an ongoing crisis, one that forced science, government, and local communities into an uneasy partnership. The silence had been broken, but safety was something that had to be maintained. Every day, indefinitely, the risks that never truly left. By the time scientists felt confident enough to speak publicly, one truth was already clear. Lake Nyos had been stabilized, but not neutralized. The danger had been reduced, not erased, and reduction is not the same as safety. A lake that must be watched forever. Unlike floods, storms, or earthquakes, Lake Nyos did not pass and move on. It stayed. It remained where it had always been, silent, still, and deceptively calm. The only difference now was knowledge. And knowledge brings responsibility. The degassing systems installed in the lake were not a one-time fix. They required constant monitoring, maintenance, and funding. If they failed, even temporarily, the gas would begin accumulating again, slowly, quietly, invisibly, the same way it had before. When technology becomes a lifeline, the pipes rising from the lake's surface became symbols of survival. They looked simple, almost fragile, but their function was critical. As long as they worked, gas would be released gradually, safely dispersing into the air where it posed no threat. If they stopped working, there would be no dramatic warning, only time. And time was exactly what allowed the disaster to happen the first time. The dam, no one could ignore. As scientists focused on gas, another danger loomed beneath the surface. The natural rock dam holding Lake Nyos in place was eroding. Formed thousands of years ago, the dam was not engineered. It was porous, weakened by water seepage and internal fractures. If it failed, the consequences would extend far beyond the immediate area. A sudden release of lake water could rush downstream, affecting communities far away, communities with no connection to the original disaster. This was a second threat layered on top of the first, stabilizing one risk without triggering another. Reinforcing the dam was necessary, but doing so carried risk. Any major construction could disturb the lake's balance. Heavy equipment, vibrations, changes in water level, all of it had to be calculated carefully. Engineers were forced into a delicate balancing act, strengthen the dam without disturbing the lake, without accelerating gas release. Every decision was conservative. Every step was slow, because mistakes were not recoverable. The human cost of long-term fear for local communities. Living near Lake Nyos meant living with conditions attached. Sirens and monitoring stations became part of the landscape. Emergency plans were discussed openly. Children were taught what to do if alarms sounded, even though many had never heard them before. Preparedness became a form of inheritance. Fear managed carefully, passed down quietly. Why some never returned. Not everyone came back. Some survivors chose to resettle permanently elsewhere. They rebuilt lives far from the lake, unwilling to sleep under the shadow of something that had already proven itself capable of silent devastation. This decision was not dramatic. It was practical. Once trust in the environment is broken, it is rarely restored completely. A disaster the world. Almost missed internationally, the Lake Nyos disaster never reached the level of attention one might expect. There were no images of destruction, no dramatic footage, no global shockwaves. Its invisibility worked against it. But among scientists, it became a turning point, a reminder that nature does not need spectacle to be deadly. A new category of natural threat. Before Nyos, few people considered lakes dangerous. After Nyos, deep volcanic lakes were reclassified, not as passive features, but as active systems capable of storing lethal potential. Studies expanded. Other lakes were evaluated. Some were deemed safe. Others were watched more closely. The lesson was clear. Still, water can hide motion. The limits of prediction. Despite advances, one problem remained unsolved. No one could predict exactly when a gas release might occur. Triggers could be subtle. Conditions could change gradually. Warnings might come too late. This uncertainty meant vigilance could never relax. The lake demanded attention, not occasionally, but always. What safety actually means. Here, safety at Lake Nyos does not mean nothing will happen. It means systems are functioning. Monitoring is active, emergency plans exist. Safety is conditional, and conditions can change. A new relationship with nature. The disaster forced a philosophical shift. Nature was no longer something to be assumed safe unless proven otherwise. It was something to be understood continuously. The lake had not acted maliciously. It had simply followed physics. The danger came from ignorance, not intent. Why this story still feels unsettling. Even now, decades later, Lake Nyos remains unsettling because of how ordinary it looks. There is no warning sign on the water itself. No visible reminder of what happened. Just a quiet lake in a green landscape. And that quiet is exactly what makes the story endure. Lake Nyos teaches a difficult lesson. Some disasters do not announce themselves. Some threats do not look like threats. And some solutions only work as long as we keep paying attention. The danger was never dramatic. It was patient. By the time Lake Nyos entered scientific textbooks, it was no longer just a local tragedy. It had become a warning to the entire world. Because what happened in Cameroon was not unique to that landscape. It was unique only in that it had finally revealed itself. A disaster that rewrote assumptions. Before Lake Nyos, lakes were not considered active threats. They were seen as static. Bodies of water shaped by geography, influenced by weather, but fundamentally passive. Nyos shattered that assumption. It demonstrated that a lake could behave like a sealed system, quietly accumulating danger over decades, then releasing it without spectacle or sound. This forced scientists to rethink how natural hazards were categorized. Some threats are loud, some are sudden, and some are patient. Searching the world for similar risks. After 1986, researchers began scanning the globe for other lakes with similar characteristics. They looked for volcanic regions, deep, stratified water. limited mixing between surface and lower layers. The results were unsettling. Several lakes, particularly in parts of Africa, showed conditions that could allow gas buildup. Lake Nyos was not alone. It was simply the first to be understood. The problem of invisible danger. One of the greatest challenges was communication. How do you warn people about something they cannot sense? There is no smell, no color, no heat, no noise. Carbon dioxide behaves like a shadow. It moves, but leaves no trace. This made public education difficult. Convincing communities to take precautions against something intangible required trust, clarity, and time. Not all regions had those resources. Lake Manoon revisited. Lake Manoon, the smaller lake that had released gas 2 years before Nyos, suddenly gained new attention. Its earlier event had been underestimated because no one understood what they were looking at. Now, with Nyos as context, Manoon became proof that these events could repeat and be missed. Degassing systems were installed there as well. 2 lakes, same solution, same vigilance required. Engineering against nature. The success of degassing systems was groundbreaking. For the first time, humans were actively preventing a natural process, not by stopping it, but by controlling its release. This approach was cautious and respectful of physics. No force, no sudden intervention, just balance. But it also raised questions. What happens if funding stops? What if maintenance lapses? What if political instability interrupts monitoring? Technology can manage risk, but only if it's maintained. The uneasy dependence on systems lake. Nyos now depends on human attention. This is an uncomfortable truth. As long as the pipes function, gas levels remain safe. If they fail, the lake will begin resetting itself toward danger. The threat does not disappear, it pauses, and pauses require supervision. Why prediction still isn't possible? Despite decades of research, one limitation remains unchanged. Scientists still cannot predict exactly when a gas release would occur if systems failed. Triggers could include small landslides, seasonal temperature changes, minor seismic activity. None of these events are unusual, which means certainty remains out of reach. Lessons for disaster science. Lake Nyos shifted disaster planning in subtle but lasting ways. It emphasized monitoring over reaction, prevention over response, understanding over assumption. The disaster showed that waiting for visible signs can be fatal. Some systems fail quietly. Why this case? Still matters today. As populations grow and communities expand into geologically active areas, the Nyos lesson becomes more relevant, not less. Humans tend to build where land looks calm. Nyos proved calm can be misleading. What lies beneath matters more than what lies on the surface. A disaster without closure. Unlike events that end with rebuilding and recovery, Lake Nyos never fully concludes. There is no final chapter, only ongoing observation. The lake remains monitored. The systems remain active. The memory remains unresolved. The emotional distance of global awareness. Internationally, Lake Nyos is often remembered as a scientific curiosity, a rare event, an anomaly. But for those who lived there, it is not abstract, it is personal. Science gained knowledge, but people paid the cost. Lake Nyos taught the world something uncomfortable. Nature does not need drama to be dangerous. Silence can be just as deadly as force, and some threats only become visible after they have passed. Lake Nyos is quiet today. The water sits still inside its volcanic crater, surrounded by green hills and open sky. Pipes rise from its surface like thin scars, functional, unremarkable, easy to ignore if you don't know what they mean. To an outsider, it looks peaceful. But peace at Lake Nyos is not the absence of danger. It is the presence of vigilance. What safety actually looks like now. Modern measurements show that gas levels inside Lake Nyos are far lower than they were in 1986. Degassing systems operate continuously, releasing carbon dioxide in controlled amounts. Sensors track pressure, chemistry, and stability. Engineers inspect equipment regularly. Scientists review data from afar. On paper, the lake is stable. But stability here is conditional. It exists only as long as monitoring continues, funding remains available, and systems function exactly as intended. Lake Nyos is not safe in the traditional sense. It is managed. The uncomfortable truth about maintenance. Unlike disasters that require rebuilding once and then fade into memory, Lake Nyos demands something more difficult. Consistency. No dramatic repairs, no visible progress, no moment of final completion, just ongoing attention. This makes it vulnerable, not to nature, but to human behavior. Budgets change, governments shift, priorities move on, and when attention fades, risk quietly returns. If the systems failed, if degassing stopped entirely, Lake Nyos would not erupt immediately. That is what makes it dangerous. Gas would begin accumulating again, slowly, invisibly, predictably. Years might pass without incident. A decade, maybe more. And then, under the right conditions, the lake would do what it has already proven it can do. Silently. Why no siren can fully protect anyone? Warning systems exist around Lake Nyos, but they are limited by the nature of the threat. Carbon dioxide does not arrive with a roar. It does not trigger panic before it arrives. It does not give people time to react. Even the best alarm can only work if people are awake, alert, and able to move quickly, often uphill. At night, those conditions are not guaranteed, which means prevention remains more important than response. A disaster that changed how we define natural lake. Nyos challenged a deep assumption that natural dangers announce themselves. Floods rise, storms darken skies, earthquakes shake the ground. Nyos did none of these. It revealed that some natural systems fail quietly, without violence or drama. The danger was not the lake itself. It was what the lake contained, and how long it was allowed to contain it. Why this event still feels unsettling. Even decades later, the Lake Nyos disaster continues to unsettle scientists, planners, and communities, not because of what happened, but because of how easily it could be overlooked. Nothing about the lake screams danger. There are no flames, no ruins, no permanent scars on the landscape. Only memory, and memory fades faster than risk. The people who live with the knowledge. For those living near Lake Nyos today, life is cautious but normal. Children go to school, fields are farmed, animals graze, but awareness is always present. People know where higher ground is. They know what the sirens mean. They know the lake is not just scenery. This awareness is quiet, but it shapes behavior in subtle ways. Why some never truly felt closure. For survivors and families, Lake Nyos never offered a clean ending. There was no moment of resolution, no clear line between before and after. The explanation came later. The safety came gradually. The losses remain permanent. Closure requires certainty. Nyos offers none. A lesson the world rarely teaches globally. Lake Nyos is often taught as a rare geological event, a curiosity, an anomaly, a case study. But its deeper lesson is rarely emphasized. Danger does not need intention. Silence does not mean safety. And nature does not prioritize human timelines. What makes this disaster different? Many disasters are defined by destruction. Lake Nyos is defined by absence. Absence of sound, absence of warning, absence of visible cause. That absence is what makes it so difficult to fully process and so easy to forget. Why it still matters today. As populations grow and expand into geologically complex regions, Lake Nyos becomes less of a historical outlier and more of a reminder. There are other lakes, other volcanic systems, other places quietly accumulating risk. Nyos teaches that understanding must come before catastrophe, not after. A final reality, Lake Nyos did not choose its moment. It followed physics. Pressure built, balance broke, gas escaped. The tragedy was not that nature acted. The tragedy was that no one knew to watch. The end that isn't an end. This story does not conclude with certainty or reassurance, because Lake Nyos does not allow that. It allows only this truth. Some disasters are not over when the silence returns. They are only waiting for attention to fade. Lake Nyos remains calm, the systems remain active, and the responsibility remains human. That is where this story ends, and where vigilance must continue.